for us, content is really language. It's the foundation of how you communicate information, ideas, now how you build credibility, how you build trust. If brands don't show up and are not positioned well there, they either don't exist.
What is that approach about content and how do you really build that value?
You're just trying new things and you're validating. It's a combination of moments, right? And hopefully those moments turn into signals that then you can capture and figure out like, okay, this is working, let's double down on it.
But then AI comes in and it seems like almost like content generation is like a little bit too easy.
People are just forgetting that the more AI automates things or makes things easier, the more important it is that humans with good judgment are asking the right questions, figuring out what the right inputs should be.
Hi everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Data Innovators and Builders. Today I'm speaking with Marcel Santilli, CEO of GrowthX. Marcel, thank you for being here and chatting with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Marcel, you have an incredible story getting into starting GrowthX, and I want to dive right into that in your journey becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe there's not that many CMOs that have turned founders. I don't know. I don't know that many. I could be wrong here. So for me, it's a slightly unique story of I started a career early on in large enterprises and was constantly building these growth engines for different companies at IBM and then HP. I was at HashiCorp leading growth. We went from 6 to 100 million in 2 years. They eventually went public. ServiceTitan eventually went public as well. Skill AI had a huge inflection curve as well on growth. And eventually I was CMO of a company called Deepgram. Amazing company. They're actually a customer of ours now as well and doing amazing in the voice AI space. And I sort of take a lot of what I had learned along the years. And the way I kind of think about it is very simple, where content is the atomic unit for marketing. And so if you can get content right and you approach content as that, and the goal and the outcome you care about is growth, you want to build an engine that figures out like what to prioritize in order to just build a growth engine, right? And so that's what I kept doing throughout my career. So Deepgram, I started doing that, but using AI workflows to just take a lot of my expert processes, if you will, of how I did that, and then adding humans in the loop in a unique blend. And that ended up helping us publish over 3,000 pages, and we continuously improved those pages. And eventually we 24x our traffic in 3 months, and it helped the company over 4x revenue. And it was a huge inflection curve for the company. So from there, I started to just teach workshops, and people came to those workshops. We had about 170 people pay a little over $500 to come to them. And that's kind of how GrowthX got started. A lot of people asking us to kind of help them end to end, not just offer one slice of the equation of help me grow and help me build a growth engine for my company. And now we do that for a lot of different companies. We're working with a little over 60 different companies, from, Ramp and Brex to Lovable, Webflow, Surge AI, and Neural Security, SentinelOne, you name it. And so it's pretty exciting. And we have a unique model where we kind of get to pick a little bit companies that we want to work with, that we feel like kind of understand content, and we can be a little bit more selective just because we build so much credibility, I think, in the market by giving away a lot of value that we've been able to do it. We just hired our first AE like 3 months ago. And so we've gotten to a little over 13 million in ARR with pretty much very little to no sales and all inbound. And so it's been a fun journey, but hard as hell, so.
Well, I mean, wow, it's such an incredible story, and there's so many things that you covered in this, right? And as I see your story, I feel like you were sort of destined to start this company, right? And you started this sort of concept pretty early on to focus on content and focus on earning the attention of the market. So, a lot of attention is all you need is kind of the foundation for all this AI stuff. And when I talk to AI builders, everybody's trying to figure out how to get that sort of attention from the end user. We're all building cool stuff, right? So talk to us a little bit about What is that approach about content, and how do you really build that value?
Yeah, maybe a way to kind of think about it is there's there's no one size fits all for how to grow and build a company, but a lot of the companies have been successful, like some of our customers, like Lovable and others. They just take a different approach to everything, and they're really delivering value first. And there's multiple ways you can deliver value. If you have a product that delivers a lot of value up front, like Lovable and others, then that's great, right? Or even Ramp and Brex, you can kind of sign up and get a lot of value pretty quickly without signing a big contract or anything like that. And then but you can also do it without actually being product led. You can do it in other ways. Like for us, we started doing workshops and just creating value and teaching people and educating the market on what they were trying to do, and then understanding where the pain points were, where they needed help beyond education, right, with the platform or a forward deployed delivery model. And then it's like iterating fast and just trying new things. It's crazy. Even today, there's companies that are just thinking through every little word. They think their homepage is going to be the end all be all forever, and it takes them 3 months to update it. We updated ours last week in 1 week, and it's just like you're just trying new things and you're validating it, and you're not thinking it as a like one and done. It's like it's a combination of moments, right? And hopefully those moments turn into signals that then you can capture and figure out like, okay, this is working. Let's double down on it, and then you can build systems to scale those things, right? And then the build in public is so critical. And finally, it's like as you find the signals that really work, you're trying to systematize them with both AI and humans. And so a lot of that I think kind of like plays together in this new approach where people are building more in public and kind of being value driven or value first and building systems around it. And I think at the end of the day, speed and building distribution is what's going to win the day, right? And so for a lot of what we do at GrowthX as well is really focused not only on that, but also thinking of content overall, which is the substantive atomic unit for marketing. You think of an ad, an email, the substance that goes on a page on a website. That's all content, right? And yeah, content right is really hard. So we're thinking really around like that as a growth engine that can be a moat for companies, right? And I think one of my favorite examples that they're not a customer, but I just really think they're one of the most incredible examples of this is Canva. They've been profitable for 10 plus years. They get about 280 million organic visitors per month. That traffic is worth your $100 million a month. So if you were to buy those clicks, they would be paying $100 million a month in that. So if you are trying to build a slightly better version of Canva today, it'll be really hard to do that, right? And so that gives you incredible defensibility and moat. And so for companies, they're just starting their journey, it can be really daunting, right? And then if you look back at Canva almost 10 years ago to the day, and they had less than 200 pages on their website, right? And so they started to just put those bets down 10 years ago. And now they have over 45,000 pages on their website, delivering over 280 million visitors, right? And sure, they do a bunch of other things as well. But if you were to take that traffic away, I bet you that would really hurt the company. And so speed, learning, and how do you build that engine that goes from 200 pages to 45,000 pages? And think of a page as an output that's really an asset that you have to nurture and enrich and watch the signals and constantly iterate, and ideally with AI and humans in the loop.
Yeah, and I think the point you make about this AI and humans in the loop is super critical, right? I mean, we've always thought about content as someone, who's some domain knowledge and expertise. They sort of translate that into articles and put that out there, right? And you proved that model way before AI was there, right? Um, but then AI comes in, and it seems like almost like content generation is like a little bit too easy. How did you sort of take that? Like, you still have to bring that expertise out, still have to cut through the noise. So how does GrowthX kind of do that from a product perspective, right? I mean, how do you bring together? And you said, human technology, bring that together. I think there's a lot of lessons for many of us here on that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, the lessons and kind of how we approach scaling that is not just on content, because for us, content is really language. It's the foundation of how you communicate information, ideas, now how you build credibilities, how you build trust, and kind of like everything is content. But then on top of that, technically content is what drives the interface. It's language. So it drives the interface with AI as well. So if you get good at content, you can get good at pretty much anything these days, right? And so for us, we kind of break it down to a few different layers. First one is context. And the context engineering piece goes beyond just the context engineering. It goes into a lot more of like seeking a deeper understanding of your company, your product, and what you're building, the market, and most importantly, or just as importantly, your audience and who you're for. And if you don't have clarity of that, and you can't even spell that out, then you can't really scale. And the way I think about it is, if you hire an intern with very little context off the street, can you delegate it to that person successfully? And if what you're trying to do with AI, you use that same context, the same inputs, and you give it to an intern, a very smart intern, and that person couldn't be successful within your own company with that context, without having to talk to someone and spend the next month figuring it out, then AI is not going to be successful either, right? And so we always take this approach of like, if you can delegate to a human, you can't delegate to AI where you can delegate successfully to another, well-capable human. And so the context is kind of like the foundation of that. And then from there, it's about like strategy for us, which is like, how do you map out different opportunities that are the kinds of questions and topics that your audience cares about that will eventually lead to you and your product? And how do you systematically become by far the best answer, right? The best answer doesn't necessarily mean, the best written answer, although it could be necessarily mean the longest, right? It's best for that audience. What is best for you is different than what's best for me, right? So if you have clarity on who you're for, then you can figure out what is best for that audience and optimize for that, right? So you become the definitive answer to those questions, and you want to map it out. But it's an infinite game, because there's an infinite long tail now, right? You go into ChatGPT or AI answer engines, and you're not putting in a few words. And those answers are also pulling your own context or your own preferences and all that it knows about you, right? And so now you're creating content that normally could happen post sales, and today they're happening inside an AI answer, where if brands don't show up and are not positioned well there, they either don't exist, right? And so people are ingesting those answers as if they were expert advice, right? Like word of mouth expert advice. And so you want to influence that, right? And so there's the context, then there's the strategy, which is mapping all those opportunities and then figuring out how to prioritize and execute against them, which is the third layer, which is then execution. And so the way we approach it is we work backwards based on the output. So if your output is a how-to guide, if your output is a newsletter, a social post, whatever the output is, within the context of your company, within the strategy and the audience you're going after, then you can work backwards on what does it take to do a really good job. But there's some primitives and approaches to that they work across the board, right? And so that's mostly defining the brief, if you will, or assignment, or what the goal is, or what the task is, if you will, right? Then pulling in the right context, and then you want to do research on the topic. That research can happen either internally within things that are only available to you in your company, or externally into the world. So the deep researcher is where we invested a lot. Then it's like a lot of planning that needs to happen to figure out how do you execute against the task, the goal, the brief, and the assignment, if you will, based on this research. Then it's drafting and executing. And then there's a bunch of post-processing and polishing. And you want humans in that process, especially at the beginning, because you're calibrating to figure out what great looks like and your definition of done. And often that calibration, it requires a lot of human judgment to know, do I need to update my context? Do I need to ingest more, better, or different data into my internal knowledge base? Is the way the deep researcher working should be tweaked because it's going, using bad sources, or the way it's planning out the task is bad, right? Or is part of the polishing process off, or whatever else, right? And so you're really decomposing everything into first principles, and then you're having a kind of like a benchmark of what, almost a blueprint of what a great output should look like. And then you have a human as an output bar raiser to figure out where can I improve the system, not this output only, in order to achieve consistently, the level of quality and results that I need in my output, right? And there's a lot more human judgment, and the human judgment in that loop is not there to just stay there forever. Is there to build leverage for the next cycle and the next iteration, you know? And then there's all these signals, right? There's all these inputs. There is all this like AI workflow, and all the executions, you know, they're happening, a bunch of different steps. Some of them have like loops, agentic loops, evals. There's like all the human interventions, an edit, a comment, a replay, or whatever else, right? And then there's like all the signals out there in the market, like the AI visibility. Is your brand ranking? Is it getting cited? Are you showing up in the right keywords and terms? Is it getting traffic? Is that traffic engaging with it? Is it converting? Those are all signals, right? So you take all those signals and then you go back and start that loop again of like, what do you prioritize next? Do you go refresh or improve a piece of content on your site, or do you go do something else? You know, so that's kind of how we think. I know that was pretty long, but hopefully like super comprehensive end to end of kind of how we think.
Oh yeah, I mean this is incredible. It's a whole engine that you have built, right? Going from the goal that you need to sort of earn that attention of the user, but who is that person? How do you get there? How do you take the signals back? How do you tune the whole thing? And I really like this sort of part where you have a human as a sort of raising the bar, like what's coming on, how do you do that? And the one part you had mentioned earlier was it's all about speed, right? You have to be moving very fast. So I mean, I'm assuming that these cycles that you're talking about are running very tight loops, right? um, and so, is that right?
Yeah, yeah, it's tight loops, but it also has to be contextualized based on the space, the domain, the brand, the credibility, the goals, right? And so, if you are in the medical space, we have um, a customer that is a supplement brand for women in different age groups of different phases of life, from fertility, premenopausal, menopausal, and they have two medical reviewers, right, to every piece of content, and that content is really like to establish their credibility as a brand, that they know what they're talking about, and to really communicate how they've done years of studies and in picking the right ingredients and how that helps and supports women and their hormones, right? And so like that can make or break their brand, and so that lane and that work stream is really focused on that. And so the bar is just different. You're not going to do a crazy high volume, but then there might be other things that you can scale a lot more. So for instance, for Ramp, we built this vendor catalog, pull some of their proprietary information and data on how different vendors, like how much people are spending on different vendors. And we use that and create a catalog of, all these vendors, alternatives, reviews, comparisons, and things like that, right? And so with that, you can be more programmatic in that approach. But it still comes from you know, how do I serve the user? It just becomes different, right? Like, so you spend a lot more time on the template, on the sources of the data, on building, benchmarks or building quality checks across your different pipelines, right? And then maybe your human review might be more of like a quality check for different things, right? And or you might build checks around like evaluations that then flag if something seems off that needs human intervention, just to double check, right? So it's different. So if you think of the pipeline as different, so on one end of the spectrum is thought leadership, and if you're writing an essay about the future of your company, obviously you're not going to delegate that and try to automate that. That makes
Yeah,
no sense, right?
yeah,
You
yeah.
might delegate and automate some of the deep research, some of the things that are going to inform your thinking. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's like, brands that are scaling at a massive scope. So, companies like GoodRx for hims and hers, they need to do, drug comparisons, or they need to talk about, how different drugs interact with each other and build content around that. Like, there's so many drugs and combinations of drugs and side effects and this and that. Like, it would be impossible for a human to be able to manage a catalog of, you know,
Mhm.
1,000 pages, right? So you do need
Yeah.
to use technology and AI for it too.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned that you ran like 170 workshops, right? And people were coming to it, they were willing to pay for that, and you were seeing the value come out of it. And I think, if I understand correctly, that led you to sort of formulating that into GrowthX as a company. To other sort of AI founders out there, when should they think of like workshops as the sort of mechanism or approach as an effective solution to validating and building into that idea?
Yeah, maybe a good anecdotal example here. I was interviewing someone for a job recently, and he was at this company that ended up running out of money, right? And I said, "Hey, I think imagine you're the CEO of that company 6 months ago. You know they were out of money, and what would you do differently, right?" And 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 that the main thing was they were doing something in AI. It was around like context engineering and it's just like this really, really, I know there's a need on this, right? But then they started doing pilots and people just wouldn't pay for the pilots. And so we went through this whole thought exercise, right? And at the end of it, essentially the conclusion was like, okay, just refine your ICP and this and that. It's like, but what are the chances you're still going to run out of money? It's like pretty high. I was like, okay, so you're solving the wrong problem here, right? Take a step back. Like, why don't you just offer to do a consulting service? Like what you just described and the people that were at this company, I would have hired them and paid them more than all your revenue, lifetime revenue of the company for that. And I'm a Series A company. And he's like, really? I was like, yeah. Like we need help with that specific thing, but we need very specific help based on what we need. And if I can buy acceleration to solving a problem that matters to me, I will pay money to buy acceleration to that problem. I want the outcome. The outcome is either solving the problem or achieving something, right? I don't want to buy a tool. I don't care about a tool. Things are changing. And so I think a lot of founders just have been so indoctrinated in this like VC industrial complex religion, if you will, of the like one size fits all. This is how you build a company. Burn, 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 raise, 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 and Series A investors just care that you get to Series B. Series B just get there, you get to Series C, get some money out of the equation in the meantime, and it just becomes this kind of like crazy thing. And it does help generate all these amazing companies and technologies. So like we do need the VC industrial complex, but as a founder, like you're there to figure out like what you're building and solving a problem and finding conviction that you know what problem you're solving, that and not necessarily just be watching signals all the time and competitors and whatnot. And it's a hard journey. So if you can use mechanisms through forward deploy or services or workshops or educating or just figure out like meet the market where they are. And it could be based on where you're tackling things. Yeah, you can build a $50 a month solution, but based on what we found is based on where the technology was at, it's like I don't want to build a $50 SEO tool or whatever. Like that just doesn't do it. I know it's not going to result in any good outcomes. I know what I need because I was a CMO hiring these things and pulling together all these pieces. And I'm like, I just want to buy the thing. I just want to buy the end-to-end thing. I don't want to hire 10 freelancers, 3 agencies, 5 tools in 6 months and then be out of a job. And so like if you can find that and have conviction in that, that's just accelerates. So the workshop is just an easy way to just say like, hey, I genuinely just want to teach people what I did. And we were like, whoa, this is awesome. And then in that process, I figure out what people actually wanted to do themselves and what they just like, this is cool. I like your thought process. I do not want to do what you're just doing. Like people do not want to do these workflows and drag and drop them and then click edit and figure out the exact prompt and learn prompt engineering and context engineering and figure out how to scale a runtime layer and run evals. It's like I'm a marketer. I do not want to do that at all. Like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think from the outside, oftentimes it looks like AI can do everything and it's very easy. But then as you get in, you realize that, it takes a lot of effort and tuning to get it right. And that's why perhaps this model that you're talking about makes so much sense, I think, is you're trying to bring AI as an accelerator or as an augment to human effort, right? So you have to fit into a certain process, a system, an outcome, and to really find out like where it fits in well, you know just coming from outside with a tool is perhaps not the best idea, right? Sort of coming in and sort of solving that problem, learning from that. And that's incredible about how you went about doing that, right? And sharing actually that learning with people.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's been a fun journey and it's way messier than probably looks from the outside.
Yeah. So one thing I'm also sort of curious about, like you work with a very sort of broad set of AI first companies today, right? And do you see the sort of the approach where in marketing specifically, right? There's a concept of a GTM engineer has been growing that, marketing itself sort of becomes engineering driven, programmatic, and so on, right? So as you see, work with these large companies that are growing super fast, do you see this as a sort of a central way of how marketing will continue to build and grow? Or is this a phase in the evolution and adoption of AI for sort of approaches that we are going through that? And, how should we think about that function itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I I think sometimes as you go and you evolve and technology evolves and things like that, there's roles that maybe come up, uh, or perhaps a bit more of a reflection of the tools than they are a reflection of what people actually wish they were doing. And I don't think when you talk to most people that call themselves go-to-market engineers, they're truly the majority of them, and I know many of them, and they are RevOps people mostly. And the few exceptions, they're tinkers, they're hackers, and it's great, right? They're great to validate 0 to 1 at times and whatnot, but they are not engineers first and foremost. And so to be a great engineer, it does take a lot of work to be a great engineer. And I think there's a lot of those kind of first principle things that you can apply to think like an engineer, approach problems like an engineer. And that's great. More people should do that. And I think that's a trend that's going to happen. But the way I kind of think about it is you have in a world where tool is not the barrier, it's enabling things, not necessarily like you're like Salesforce is probably the biggest example of that, right? Like it feels like you need a PhD to be a Salesforce admin, and we'll just like hold that knowledge, and people don't even know how to change a field in Salesforce. It's like, oh gosh, like this is crazy, you know. And so for me, you have process architects, and you have input calibrators and output bar raisers at three roles that I think, regardless of the title, is a little bit kind of how I think about it. And so if you think about, like, let's take a process architect, right? A go-to-market engineer at times, they're not necessarily the best salesperson in your team. They're not a go-to-market strategist at times. Most of them have never been an end-to-end leader who have actually been the ones driving the end-to-end go-to-market strategy for a company, right? There could be exceptions, but and
Mhm.
so they might not be the person that actually holds that knowledge of what the workflow, not the technology workflow, drag and drop workflow. I'm talking about how work gets done, right? At HashiCorp, the founders always had this kind of principle called workflows before technology. And it was all about like figure out how you go about doing the work and what are the expert processes, your thought process, the logic, right? That you follow to do something, how you manage opportunities, how do you research your customer, how do you figure out what to say, how to say it, and things like that. And a lot of that, that's how I think about like the process architects. And you don't need like a bunch of them in the company, right? Like I've done most of the process architecture for the things that we've automated or streamlined, and and then once you have the blueprint, then you can actually have a legit engineer build in the best way possible in code, ideally, and go back to primitives that work, right? Then you have the input calibrators, and I think this is like part of the challenge is people are just forgetting that the more AI automates things or makes things easier, the more important it is that humans with good judgment are asking the right questions, figuring out what the right inputs should be, and calibrating on expectations, learning from the whole loop, right? And connecting the dots and then communicating their ideas effectively, right? And sometimes like you might just not have clarity on what like the core of your idea of the thing you're trying to do is. And you need kind of these input calibrators that really have great taste and are
Mhm.
there to ask questions. And a lot of what we do is like we might get on a kickoff call or do a deep dive with an expert and we say, hey, you're subject matter experts in security or something, right? Like tell me more. Like who's your audience, what you do, like why does this matter? How do you build this and whatnot? And then you just learn from that, right? And then you use AI to process it, but you still need somebody there for that judgment. And then the output bar raisers, which I mentioned that before. And so I think about that a little bit more and less of like go-to-market engineers. And most go-to-market engineers from companies, it's just like, oh, I need someone to set up my HubSpot, or hey, I need someone to set up some like clay table automations for me to do basic enrichment. It's like, cool, that's awesome, but I think that's very different from engineers we have in our company, at least.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible framework actually, and understanding what workflow you want, I think is the most important thing. Coding it up into some tools, a lot of it that can be automated as well, I think comes as a secondary part, right? And then you can always iterate, as you said. And what you said about input calibrator is actually really important. I think it gets underestimated. You said earlier that you would have gone and paid for that context engineering company because that is the input part of it, right?
Yep.
Building that context, the prompts, and of course, as you had mentioned, tuning the prompts as you iterate through that process, and all of that sort of input goes in and sort of wires it. And talking about input, would you what role does data play? I mean, you are definitely taking all this data in to see how things are working, right? But um when marketing has always been data driven, but what's the role of data? Is there increasing, and what challenges do you see from that perspective?
There's a maybe a good example here just to illustrate this. So we're working with one of the companies that is AI native and the, call vibe coding space. They have a lot of data, right, on users signing up and, millions of users signing up. And they have a really rich data because it's not just the session data. There's like the prompts that people put in, whether it comes back, how long during the session, when they upgraded. So we're trying to figure out like what is the right strategy of programmatic pages to create for them. And so one of the things we did is like, hey, connect to the data team. We talked to the data team, and there are a couple of data scientists, and we said, hey, do you have any insights here on the use cases, the kind of users, ICP, anything like that? And like, well, we built a bunch of dashboards and whatnot. I was like, well, is there any chance we can get a dump of like a slice of that data? So we got essentially like a subset of the data around the sessions, and that included a lot of sessions that they did a bunch of things, got stuck, never came back, did a bunch of things, got stuck, then it came back, did a bunch more things, and then eventually signed up for their pro plan or whatever they call it, right? And and so they couldn't come up with a lot of insights, and so what we did is like we built a workflow essentially that just went through that data and described a narrative of that data in plain English. Essentially, think of it as like you're just describing what happened. This user did this. They were trying to build this. They were an agency. They were a solopreneur. They were this. They were that. And they tried to do this. They got stuck. So then they pivoted and built this thing instead. And blah blah blah. Then they left or whatever, right? And then after that, it made it so much easier for us to run a couple of other processes to just categorize them and add, essentially, like think of it as like tags, essentially, right? Like categories based on use cases, based on a bunch of taxonomy, that very simple taxonomy that we created. And then we just did like a cohort analysis, and it was like so simple. It was just like these tables, and it was color coded, and you can see like the red, essentially the strongest correlations, right? And those are the types of use cases that were more likely to be successful using this tool. And then within those, there was like the actual examples, right? Like, hey, internal tools, landing pages, these types of websites or whatever. And it's like, cool, those are the ones we should go create templates under, right? Perfect. Like, okay, that's it. Go. Now go. And and that whole process I just described took like less than 2 days. And the data science team, they're great, they're smart, but there weren't the data was the same, right? And that's the difference between, are you going to use AI to make a prettier chart, or are you going to take the context you have, which the data science team didn't have, right? And what your goal is and what you're trying to accomplish. And then are you going to use the data just to answer the thing that you really need to answer, that and nothing else? And then once you have confidence in that answer, go execute, right? And then later on, you can watch for signals to figure out if it's working or not working what you're doing, right? Like, but that's just like an example. It's like one off, one and done. And we use AI to really kind of like process things and enrich the data in a way that the data tells a better story or a more clear story, and also make it easier to analyze patterns.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think looking at data at an individual level and trying to figure out what's the story behind it, great way to sort of look at it versus just dashboard it or visualize it. And yeah, that's bringing more context into the data. Truly.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to ask you, because you've mentioned velocity and speed and iteration multiple times, is that um, I think for startups who are getting started, much easier to build that. What about AI teams in bigger companies that are trying to be AI first? How do they bring that culture of velocity? Are there things that you have maybe seen or practiced that they should learn from that experience?
I don't know, maybe I have a hot take here,
Yeah,
but um, if you can clarify who are the people that are like in those three different roles that I mentioned that are just absolutely incredible, right? And keep those around. Everybody else, if they're not doing that, they're not building leverage for themselves. They're not being clarity. They're not, great input calibrators. They're not connecting dots, and they're not the ultimate expert that can be output bar raisers at all. It it just they're just slowing everybody else down, and they're just making it slower and harder for you to get to an answer, a decision, and to get data, right? And to kind of see if something's working or not and build velocity and momentum, right? It kind of like you got to build the momentum. There are teams that have 50, 60 people in marketing or in other departments too. And it's so much harder. We just see like there's customers we can ship the same thing with the same inputs, the same process, same systems in one day, and this can be like 2, 3 weeks. And you're just waiting around, and you're just trying to get consensus, and you're just like trying to like get a hold of someone, and it's like, oh, they're busy. They have five other things. You're like, wait, hold on. Like you have, you know, 5,000 employees, and you have 100 people in marketing, and it's way harder to get an answer and get the same output out. And it's just like, that's hard to justify in my opinion. And then I think that can maybe sound a little bit mean, but I truly believe that you are blessing people in some ways. This can be controversial, but you're giving people the opportunity to retool themselves and reinvent themselves. And but then it's up to them if they're going to do it or not, right? And so the some of the best people we have today, and both at our companies and I seen out there, are some of the people that had forced themselves to have that break. Either force themselves to do the break or someone forced them to into it, right? They just took that time to go super deep and build intellectual curiosity and build with it and reinvent themselves. And I'm not talking like years here, I'm talking like 1 or 2 months to go super deep. My co-founder did the same thing. He left his last company he founded and took a year off just studying and going super deep, right? Before we partner. And so you got to build that room. And if you still have a job, figure out a way to build that room in order to do that and retool yourselves. And if you don't, then it's going to be really hard. And if you're running in a bigger company, a bigger team, you like just look at the output that people are delivering. And if it's not absolutely incredible, out of this world, output, it's like, what are you doing here?
yeah.
uh, that's kind of how we have to be, at least, right? And I think large companies are doing that, cut by cut, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know.
Yeah. I think AI is definitely here to augment humans, help us be more productive, but it does require a change in the work style as well. And, that curiosity to go in, go deep, and get native with it, because everybody else is moving fast. The world's not going to stop, right? So, better get on that sort of, model and become native into that, right? So,
You can
yeah,
take every single person in your company and ask them, what is the outcome you're
yeah,
optimizing for, and that your job depends on, and see what they answer, right? And then say, what is the output that you can get out that will influence that outcome? And then three, what are the controllable inputs that will drive either the volume, quality, or velocity of those outputs that then influence the outcome you care about? And if you can answer those three things with clarity, and and you can hold those people accountable to those three things, and you start with the inputs that drive the right outputs that deliver the right outcomes, then you have like clarity for everybody, right?
well said. Very well said. So, as we come to the close, Marcel, tell me one tool or technology that you can't live without.
Whisper flow.
Okay. And tell us something that most people may not have heard of, but you have just, you're working with cutting edge companies that you're already seeing like the next up and coming thing.
I don't know if it's like no one has heard of, but context engineering is just so critical, and I think just be really good at writing. If you don't have good first principles thinking and you're not good at writing, just it's a muscle. Just get good at writing, good at organizing your thoughts, and you're gonna be incredibly valuable for the rest of your existence.
Yeah. Actually, context engineering is definitely um, coming up and very critical to getting best outcomes from AI. Would you define context engineering for our audience and how you see that?
To me, it's big picture, right? And I always like to kind of put the analogy of maybe humans, and humans have quite large context windows in their brain. But if you go to a brand new employee and they walk in the first day, or I just did our vision meeting for the new hires this week and just this morning, and I spend the next 10 hours just dumping everything I know about the company at once, right? They might be able to absorb some of it, but their brains are going to be flooded. They are not going to know what to prioritize, what to do, what great looks like, or anything like that. And just because they have, a million tokens in their context window doesn't mean you should flood them, right? And so when you think about one input and then one output, and just that is just a simple in and out, input in, output out. And if you flood one context window of one step, that just like deteriorates performance, right? And now you start to multiply between humans, AI, agentic systems with evals, and kind of across different layers, across very complex workflows and things like that. And now it's just like way harder, right? And how can you distill it down to the essence and manage that context, and so that you know when to share that context and how to measure if it's being effective, and use that as the benchmark as well. And so it's what a CEO should do. It's what a leader should do, right? You're the context. You are the context, right? You're driving the context. You're saying what the goals are. You're defining what great looks like, what done looks like, how much you should know as an employee, what your goal is as an employee, what this department should do, what that department should do, how to measure that. And it's pretty hard challenge as humans. And so for AI, it's not going to be any
Mhm.
easier to do.
Yeah. Cool. Amazing. Amazing stuff that we covered, Marcel. I mean, we talked about, um, you know, designing the flow itself, like process design, input calibrator, output bar raiser, like just thinking about work in this framework. I think that's amazing. The speed and velocity sort of approach that you talked about, and, how to really think very clearly about the outcomes that we are all creating. And of course, love the approach that you have taken with building workshops, understand what you are doing, solve the problem, be very focused on sort of building the solution. So a lot of great topics that we covered today. Thank you so much, Marcel. It's been incredible.
For having me. This is fun.
Thank you.